I think I didn't do anything wrong, just played a little joke on my husband at a dinner party. Now, I'm sitting at my kitchen table, staring at divorce papers with my name on them. They say, what goes around comes around, but I never thought it would come to this. Before we dive deeper into this story, I have one small request. Please subscribe, drop a like, comment, and hit that hype button to boost this channel so more people can discover these incredible stories. The dining room was perfect that night, candles flickering against my grandmother's china, the smell of roasted lamb filling the air. I'd spent hours preparing for this dinner party, making sure everything would impress our friends and family. Marcus sat at the head of the table in his usual quiet way, cutting his meat methodically while conversation flowed around him. "So, Marcus," I said, raising my wine glass with a theatrical flourish, "tell everyone about your exciting week grading freshman essays about Romeo and Juliet." The table chuckled, and I felt that familiar rush of being the center of attention. Marcus looked up from his plate, his brown eyes meeting mine with a flicker of something I couldn't quite read. "It was fine, Lysandra. The kids are actually pretty insightful when they—" "Oh, he spent 3 hours last night debating whether one student used a semicolon correctly," I interrupted, rolling my eyes dramatically. 3 hours? Can you imagine? My mother Rhonda let out her signature laugh, loud and slightly shrill. "Honey, that's just Marcus being Marcus. Remember when he spent our entire anniversary dinner explaining the historical accuracy of some documentary? That wasn't exactly what happened, but close enough." Tessa, my sister, jumped in with her own story. "Remember when he corrected my grammar at Christmas, in front of the kids?" The laughter grew louder. I watched Marcus's jaw tighten almost imperceptibly, but he just took another sip of his water. Always water, never wine, another quirk I'd learned to find irritating rather than admirable. "The best part," I continued, emboldened by the audience, "is that he actually enjoys it. He told me yesterday that grading papers is meditative, like it's yoga or something." Dan, my brother-in-law, shifted uncomfortably in his seat. "Marcus works hard. Teaching isn't easy." But I was on a roll now. "Oh, he works hard all right. Last week he spent an entire Saturday reorganizing his lesson plans. For fun. I suggested we take the kids to the beach, but no, apparently his filing system needed optimization." I noticed Marjorie, Marcus's mother, had stopped eating altogether. She was watching her son with the kind of protective concern that had always irritated me. Harold, Marcus's father, cleared his throat awkwardly. "Well," Harold said, "organization is a good quality in a—" "Is it, though?" I cut him off, feeling the wine making me bolder. "I mean, when your husband would rather color-code his gradebook than plan a romantic evening with his wife." The table fell silent for a moment. Marcus set down his fork carefully, the small clink against the china unnaturally loud. "Lysandra," he said quietly, "maybe we could—" "Oh, come on," I laughed, waving my hand dismissively. "Don't be so sensitive. It's all in good fun, right, everyone?" Rhonda nodded enthusiastically. "Exactly. If you can't laugh at yourself, what's the point?" Tessa raised her glass. "To Marcus, the most organized man in suburbia." More laughter erupted around the table. I felt vindicated, powerful even. This was what I'd been missing, the ability to command a room, to be witty and entertaining, instead of just another suburban wife discussing grocery lists and school pickup schedules. Marcus stood up slowly, his napkin falling to his chair. "Excuse me," he said, his voice steady but distant. "I think I'll let you all enjoy dessert without me." "Oh, Marcus, don't be such a wet blanket," I called after him, but he was already walking toward the hallway. "See what I mean?" I said to the table, gesturing toward his retreating figure. No sense of humor whatsoever. But something in the way he'd left, not angry, not storming off, just quietly removing himself, made me feel oddly unsettled. I pushed the feeling down and turned back to my audience. "More wine, anyone?" The conversation continued, but I noticed Dan had grown quiet, and Marjorie kept glancing toward the hallway where Marcus had disappeared. About 20 minutes later, when I went to get the dessert from the kitchen, I passed by Marcus's study. The door was slightly ajar, and I could see the blue glow of his laptop screen. He was typing something, but I couldn't see what. When I pushed the door open a little wider, he quickly minimized whatever he'd been working on. "Just checking my email," he said without looking at me. "The party's still going on, you know. People are asking where you went." "I'm sure they'll manage without me." His tone was neutral, but there was something underneath it I'd never heard before. Something final. I shrugged and went back to serve dessert, but the rest of the evening felt different somehow. Less triumphant. When our guests finally left, Marcus had already gone to bed. I found myself cleaning up alone, replaying the evening in my mind, and wondering why victory felt so hollow. The next Monday at work, I was still thinking about the dinner party when Owen appeared at my cubicle with 2 cups of coffee. "You look like you need this," he said, setting one down beside my keyboard. Owen Chalmers had joined our logistics team 6 months ago, and he had this way of making even the most mundane workday feel like an adventure. "Rough weekend," I admitted, accepting the coffee gratefully. "Family stuff." "Want to talk about it?" He perched on the edge of my desk, close enough that I could smell his cologne. Something expensive and sophisticated that Marcus would never think to wear. I found myself telling him about the dinner party, about Marcus's reaction, about how suffocated I felt in my marriage. Owen listened with the kind of focused attention I hadn't received from Marcus in years. "Sounds like you married your high school guidance counselor instead of your husband," Owen said, with a sympathetic smile. "That's exactly what it feels like." The validation was intoxicating. He's so predictable. Every morning, same routine. Every weekend, same activities. I feel like I'm disappearing. "You're too vibrant for that," Owen said, and the way he looked at me made my stomach flutter in a way I'd almost forgotten was possible. Our friendship deepened over the following weeks. Coffee breaks became lunch dates. Lunch dates became after-work drinks. I told myself it was harmless. Just friendship, just someone who appreciated me for who I really was, instead of trying to dim my light. At home, Marcus had grown even quieter than usual. He still did his share of household duties, still helped Evie with her homework, and read bedtime stories to Max, but there was a distance between us that hadn't been there before. "Daddy seems sad," Evie said one evening while I was tucking her into bed. "Daddy's just tired from work, sweetheart." "Are you and Daddy fighting?" The question caught me off guard. "What makes you ask that?" "You don't laugh together anymore, and you sleep in different rooms sometimes." I smoothed her hair back, searching for the right words. Adults sometimes need space to think. It doesn't mean anything's wrong. But even as I said it, I wondered if that was true. The next day, I called Tessa during my lunch break. "I think Marcus is having some kind of midlife crisis," I told her. "He's been so cold and distant since the dinner party. I can barely get 2 words out of him." "Maybe he's just processing," Tessa suggested. "You know how he is. He internalizes everything." "That's the problem. I can't live with someone who shuts down every time life gets a little complicated. I need someone who can engage, you know? Someone who gets excited about things." "Like what?" I thought about Owen, about how he'd surprised me with tickets to a wine tasting the previous weekend, while Marcus stayed home with the kids. About how he made me feel interesting and desirable again. "I don't know. Just more than what I have." Tessa was quiet for a moment. "Are you thinking about counseling? Maybe you two just need to learn how to communicate better." "I've suggested it. He says he's open to discussion, but never actually commits to anything. It's like living with a polite stranger." That wasn't entirely true. Marcus had actually scheduled a consultation with a marriage counselor for the following month. But Owen had made me realize how much I'd been settling for, how much life I'd been missing. The affair began almost accidentally. Owen and I were working late, on a particularly complex shipping manifest when he leaned over to point something out on my screen. The proximity, the intimacy of being alone in the quiet office, the way he smelled, it all culminated in a kiss that felt like coming alive after years of sleepwalking. "I've wanted to do that for weeks," he whispered against my lips. "We shouldn't," I said, but I was already kissing him back. "Probably not," he agreed, but his hands were in my hair, and I felt more desired than I had in years. We told ourselves it was just physical attraction, just a moment of weakness. But moments became meetings, and meetings became a full-blown affair. Owen knew all the best restaurants, all the most interesting cultural events. He made me feel sophisticated and worldly in a way that grocery shopping and parent-teacher conferences never could. The guilt was manageable as long as I focused on what I wasn't getting at home. Marcus's predictability, his contentment with routine, his complete lack of spontaneity, these became evidence that I deserved better, that I was simply reclaiming the excitement that marriage had stolen from me. 3 weeks into the affair, I found an envelope on my desk at work. No return address, just my name typed on a white label. Inside was a printout of text messages between Owen and me, messages that could only have been accessed through my phone or his. My hands shook as I read my own words back to myself. "Can't wait to see you tonight. Marcus thinks I'm at book club." And Owen's response, "Your secret's safe with me, beautiful." I looked around the office frantically, but everyone seemed focused on their own work. Who could have done this? And what did they want? The envelope contained nothing else. No demands, no threats, just evidence that someone knew. I shoved the papers into my purse and spent the rest of the day in a state of barely controlled panic. That evening, Marcus was helping Max with a puzzle when I got home. He looked up when I entered the living room, and for a moment, I was certain he could see my guilt written across my face. "How was book club?" he asked casually. "Fine," I managed. "We discussed the ending." He nodded and turned back to the puzzle, but something in his expression made my stomach clench. It was the same look he'd had at the dinner party. Not angry, not accusatory, just aware. That night, I lay awake staring at the ceiling, wondering if my marriage was worth saving and whether it was already too late to try. 2 weeks later, I decided to organize another group dinner. If someone was watching me, I reasoned, the best defense was to appear completely normal. A devoted wife with nothing to hide. Bistro Amélie was the perfect venue, upscale enough to impress, public enough to feel safe. I'd invited the same crowd as before, plus a few additional friends from work. Owen had declined, claiming a prior commitment, which left me feeling oddly deflated. Without his validation to look forward to, I found myself more dependent than ever on the approval of our social circle. Marcus arrived exactly on time, as always, wearing the navy blazer I'd bought him for his birthday. He looked handsome in an understated way, but next to the other husbands in their designer clothes and expensive watches, he seemed almost quaint. "Sorry I'm late." Tessa breezed in wearing a dress that probably cost more than Marcus made in a week. "Traffic was insane." "You're not late," Marcus said mildly. "Reservation isn't until 7:30. "See?" I laughed to the group. "Marcus operates on Marcus time. Everything's scheduled down to the minute." A few people chuckled, but the response was more muted than I'd expected. Dan and Marjorie had arrived together, and both seemed unusually quiet. Once we were seated, I found myself working harder than usual to maintain the conversation. Marcus contributed when directly addressed, but otherwise seemed content to observe. His calm was starting to feel less like withdrawal and more like patience, the kind of patience that made me inexplicably nervous. "So, Marcus," said Jennifer, one of my work friends, "Lysandra tells us you're a teacher. What grade?" "High school English, mostly sophomores and juniors." "That must be challenging. Teenagers can be so difficult." Marcus smiled, the first genuine smile I'd seen from him all evening. They're actually pretty remarkable when you give them a chance. They see things adults miss sometimes. Like what? Jennifer seemed genuinely interested, which annoyed me for reasons I couldn't articulate. Well, last week we were discussing symbolism in The Great Gatsby, and one of my students pointed out that Nick Carraway isn't actually a reliable narrator, that everything we know about Gatsby is filtered through someone who admits to being dishonest himself. That's actually really insightful, Dan said, leaning forward. I felt the conversation slipping away from me, becoming too serious, too academic. Of course, Marcus can find deep meaning in a grocery list, I interjected. Last week he spent 20 minutes explaining why the way I organize our shopping cart reveals something profound about my psyche. The table laughed, but it felt forced. Marjorie was staring at her water glass, and Harold looked uncomfortable. Actually, Marcus said quietly, I was just trying to help you find the frozen items faster. You'd mentioned being frustrated with how long grocery trips were taking. The correction stung because it was accurate. I had complained about that, and he had been trying to help, but admitting that would undermine the narrative I'd been building. Well, you know Marcus, I said with a wave of my hand. Always trying to optimize everything. He probably has a spreadsheet for our anniversary dates. Do you? Asked Rhonda with genuine curiosity. No, Marcus said simply. An awkward silence fell over the table. I scrambled to fill it. I'm kidding, of course. Though he did forget our anniversary last year, I had to remind him the day after. This was a complete fabrication. Marcus had surprised me with dinner at the restaurant where we'd had our first date, along with a photo album of our relationship that had taken him months to compile. But the lie served its purpose. Several people made sympathetic noises, and I felt the attention shift back to me. Men, sighed Jennifer. They remember every sports statistic from 1987 but forget the date they proposed. Exactly. I felt vindicated. I swear, sometimes I feel more like his personal assistant than his wife. Marcus set down his fork carefully. Lysandra, could we? Oh, here we go, I said, rolling my eyes dramatically. The look. You all know the look, right? The one that says, you're embarrassing me in public. More uncomfortable laughter rippled around the table. Dan had stopped eating altogether, and Marjorie was openly frowning now. I think, Marjorie said carefully, that Marcus just... It's fine, Mom, Marcus said, his voice steady. Lysandra's just having fun. But there was something in the way he said fun that made it sound like a foreign concept, something he was observing from a great distance. The dinner continued, but the energy had shifted. Conversations became stilted, and I found myself working harder and harder to recapture the easy camaraderie of earlier gatherings. By the time dessert arrived, Dan and Marjorie were making excuses to leave early. Early morning tomorrow, Dan said, though it was only 9 o'clock. Of course, I said, though I felt stung by their obvious disapproval. Thanks for coming. Marjorie hugged Marcus goodbye, but only nodded at me. Harold shook his son's hand with what looked like sympathy. After they left, the remaining group seemed to relax slightly, and I thought I'd salvaged the evening. We lingered over coffee and shared desserts, and I managed to steer the conversation towards safer topics, vacation plans, home renovations, local gossip. When the check arrived, Marcus quietly handed over his credit card before anyone could object. You don't have to do that, Jennifer protested. It's fine, Marcus said. My pleasure. As we were gathering our coats, I overheard Jennifer whisper to another friend, He seems really sweet. I don't understand why she... The whisper trailed off when they noticed me approaching, but the implication hung in the air like smoke. Outside the restaurant, Marcus walked me to my car in silence. I'll see you at home, he said, but there was something final in his tone. Aren't you riding with me? I think I'll walk for a bit, clear my head. Marcus, it's 10 blocks. I know. He was already turning away. Drive safely. I wanted to argue, to demand an explanation, but something in his posture warned me off. Instead, I got in my car and drove home, checking my rearview mirror repeatedly for his familiar figure on the sidewalk. At home, I poured myself a large glass of wine and settled in to wait for him. When he finally arrived an hour later, I was ready with an apology, or at least an explanation. But Marcus just nodded at me politely and headed upstairs. When I followed a few minutes later, I found he'd moved his pillows and a change of clothes to the guest room. "Marcus, what are you doing?" "I thought you might sleep better with more space," he said without looking at me. "But we should talk about tonight. I know you're upset." "I'm not upset, Lysandra. I'm tired." "Tired of what?" He paused in the doorway of the guest room, and for a moment I thought he might actually answer. Instead, he just said, "Good night. Sleep well." The door closed with a soft click, leaving me alone in our bedroom, staring at the space where my husband used to sleep. I decided to visit Marjorie the next afternoon, telling myself it was just a courtesy call to smooth over any awkwardness from the dinner. In reality, I was desperate for some sign that I hadn't irreparably damaged my relationships with Marcus's family. Marjorie answered the door in her gardening clothes, soil still clinging to her hands. She looked surprised to see me but stepped aside to let me in. "Lysandra, I wasn't expecting you. I was in the neighborhood and thought I'd stop by. Is this a bad time?" "No, of course not. Let me just wash my hands." I settled into the familiar living room while she disappeared into the kitchen. The vellum family photos lined the mantelpiece. Marcus at various ages, his graduation from college, our wedding day, pictures of Evie and Max. In every photo, Marcus looked genuinely happy, his smile reaching his eyes in a way I realized I hadn't seen in months. "Coffee?" Marjorie asked, returning with clean hands and a guarded expression. "That would be lovely." She busied herself with the coffee maker while I searched for the right opening. The silence stretched uncomfortably between us. "About last night," I finally began. "I hope I didn't—" "Lysandra," Marjorie interrupted, turning to face me. "We need to talk." Something in her tone made my stomach drop. "Of course. What about?" She poured 2 cups of coffee with deliberate care, then sat across from me in Harold's recliner. "I'm concerned about Marcus." "Concerned how?" "He's not himself. He hasn't been for weeks." She studied my face carefully. "I was hoping you might know why." I felt heat rise in my cheeks but forced myself to maintain eye contact. "He's been under a lot of stress at work. Budget cuts, you know, larger class sizes." "Is that all?" "What else would it be?" Marjorie was quiet for a long moment, sipping her coffee. When she spoke again, her voice was measured but firm. "Last month, Marcus asked me about our family lawyer. Said he might need some legal advice about financial planning." She set down her cup. "Marcus has never been interested in financial planning. He leaves all that to you." My heart began to race, but I kept my expression neutral. "Maybe he's just being more responsible, planning for the kids' college funds or something." "Maybe." Marjorie didn't sound convinced. "He's also been staying late at school more often, working on weekends. Harold ran into him at the library last Saturday. Said he looked like he hadn't slept in days. Teaching is demanding. And then there are the credit card statements." The words hit me like a physical blow. "I'm sorry?" "Harold handles our family phone plan. Marcus is still on it, has been since college, and we never bothered to change it. The statements show some interesting activity." I could barely breathe. "What kind of activity?" "Hotel charges, restaurant bills for one person, purchases at stores Marcus has never shopped at." Marjorie leaned forward. "Lysandra, if there's something going on, something Marcus needs support with, we want to help. But we can't help if we don't know what's happening." The concern in her voice was genuine, but I could hear the underlying suspicion. They thought Marcus was having an affair. The irony might have been funny if I weren't so terrified. "I don't know what those charges could be," I said, forcing confusion into my voice. "Maybe someone stole his card information. For 3 months, without him noticing." I felt trapped, cornered by their kindness and their questions. The smart thing would be to deflect, to express my own concern and suggest we all talk to Marcus together. Instead, I felt my old defenses rising. "You know what I think this is really about," I said, setting down my coffee cup with a sharp clink. "You've never thought I was good enough for Marcus. From day one, you've been waiting for me to mess up, to prove that your precious son married beneath him." Marjorie's eyebrows rose. "That's not—" "It is, though. You think because I didn't go to graduate school, because I work in logistics instead of education, because I like to have fun instead of spending my weekends grading papers, that somehow I'm dragging Marcus down. Lysandra, please." "Well, maybe Marcus is the problem. Maybe he's so boring, so predictable, so completely lacking in passion that he's driving me crazy. Maybe I'm the one who deserves sympathy here." The words tumbled out before I could stop them, fueled by weeks of guilt and fear and the terrible knowledge that I was destroying my own life one lie at a time. Marjorie stared at me for a long moment, her expression shifting from concern to something much colder. "I see," she said quietly. Harold chose that moment to come in from the garage, tool belt still around his waist. He looked between us, clearly sensing the tension. "Everything all right in here?" "Lysandra was just leaving," Marjorie said, standing up. "Actually," I said, desperation making me reckless. "Maybe Harold should hear this too. Maybe you should both know that your son is paranoid and controlling, that he monitors my every move, questions my friends, makes me account for every minute of my day. Maybe that's why he's acting strange, because he can't handle the fact that I have a life outside of his perfectly organized little world." The lies felt real as I spoke them, justified by my fear and anger. In that moment, I almost believed them myself. Harold looked genuinely confused. "Marcus is controlling? That doesn't sound like—" "You don't live with him. You don't see how he manipulates situations, how he makes me feel guilty for wanting basic things like adult conversation and social interaction." "Is that what last night was?" Marjorie asked, her voice deadly quiet. "Adult conversation? Social interaction? What's that supposed to mean?" "It means," she said, moving toward the front door, "that humiliating your husband in public isn't social interaction. It's cruelty." I was joking. God, you people have no sense of humor. "We have plenty of humor, Lysandra. We just don't find meanness funny." Harold was looking back and forth between us like he was watching a tennis match. "Maybe we should all sit down and—" "No," Marjorie said firmly. "I think Lysandra should go home and think very carefully about what kind of wife she wants to be, and what kind of mother." The mention of my children hit like a slap. "Don't you dare question my parenting." "I'm not questioning it. I'm observing it. Evie asked me last week why Mommy and Daddy don't hug anymore. Max told Harold that the house feels scary sometimes." Marjorie's voice broke slightly. "Those children adore you both. They deserve better than whatever this is." I wanted to argue, to defend myself, but the fight had gone out of me. Instead, I grabbed my purse and headed for the door. "Tell Marcus," I said over my shoulder, "that if he has something to say to me, he can say it himself, instead of sending his mother to do his dirty work." I was in my car with the engine running when my phone buzzed with a text from Marcus. "We need to talk. Meet me at Grant & Associates at 9 a.m. tomorrow." Grant & Associates, the law firm Harold had mentioned. My hands shook as I typed back, "Why there?" His response came immediately, "You'll understand tomorrow." I sat in the Vellum's driveway for 10 minutes, staring at my phone and trying to figure out how everything had gone so wrong so quickly. When I looked up, I could see Marjorie watching me through her living room window, her face a mask of disappointment and concern. I drove home to an empty house. Marcus was still at school, the kids at aftercare, and spent the evening pacing from room to room, trying to prepare for a conversation I couldn't imagine surviving. Grant & Associates occupied the third floor of a downtown office building I'd driven past hundreds of times without really seeing. The waiting room was all leather and mahogany, the kind of place that charged by the hour and made no apologies for it. Marcus was already there when I arrived, sitting calmly in one of the expensive chairs with the manila folder in his lap. He looked up when I entered, and I was struck by how different he seemed, not angry, not hurt, just resolved. "Lysandra," he said, standing politely, "thank you for coming." "Marcus, what is this? What are we doing here?" Before he could answer, a woman in her 50s appeared from an inner office. She was impeccably dressed, with silver hair and the kind of confident bearing that suggested she'd been winning arguments for decades. "Mrs. Vellum, I'm Patricia Grant. Please, come in." The office was even more intimidating than the waiting room. Floor-to-ceiling law books, diplomas covering one wall, a desk that looked like it had been carved from a single tree. Marcus and I sat in matching chairs across from Ms. Grant, the space between us feeling like an ocean. "I've asked you both here," Ms. Grant began, "because Mr. Vellum has retained my services regarding the dissolution of your marriage." The words hit me like a physical blow. "Dissolution? Marcus, we haven't even tried counseling yet. We haven't—" "Actually," he said quietly, "we have an appointment with Dr. Rodriguez next Tuesday. I made it 6 weeks ago." "You never told me that." "I tried to, several times. You always said you were too busy, or that we should wait until things calmed down at work, or that maybe we should try fixing things on our own first." I stared at him, trying to remember those conversations. Had he really tried to tell me? Had I been so distracted by Owen, so focused on my own unhappiness, that I'd missed my husband's attempts to save our marriage? "It doesn't matter now," Ms. Grant said briskly. "Mr. Vellum has asked me to present certain information to you, Mrs. Vellum, in the interest of transparency and in hopes of reaching an amicable agreement regarding custody and asset division." "Information? What information?" Marcus opened the manila folder and removed a stack of papers. Even from across the desk, I could see printouts of text messages, bank statements, photographs. "Marcus," I whispered, "what did you do?" "I documented," he said simply. "When someone you love starts lying to you, you have two choices. You can pretend not to notice, or you can pay attention. I chose to pay attention." Ms. Grant took the papers from Marcus and spread them across her desk like evidence at a crime scene. Which, I realized with growing horror, was exactly what they were. "Hotel receipts," she said, pointing to the first set of documents. "The Marriott downtown, the Hilton by the airport, the boutique place on 5th Street, all paid for with your personal credit card, Mrs. Vellum. All on dates when you told your husband you were working late or attending book club." My mouth went dry. "I can explain. Text messages," she continued, moving to the next stack. "Recovered from your phone during a brief window when you left it unattended. Very romantic correspondence with one Owen Chalmers, who I believe is your co-worker." I looked at Marcus in shock. "You went through my phone?" "You left it on the kitchen counter while you were upstairs giving Max a bath. It was buzzing constantly. I thought it might be an emergency." His voice remained steady, but I could see the pain in his eyes. "It was an emergency, just not the kind I expected." Ms. Grant held up a photograph. "This was taken outside Café Luna 3 weeks ago. You and Mr. Chalmers appeared to be close." The image showed Owen and me kissing beside his car. I remembered that afternoon. We'd been celebrating landing a major client, and I'd felt so alive, so appreciated. Now, it just looked sordid. "There are also financial records," Ms. Grant continued. "Unexplained purchases, restaurant bills, gifts that didn't come home. And then there are the work records." "Work records?" "Your company's IT department was very helpful when Mr. Vellum explained his concerns about identity theft. Apparently, your personal email account has been accessed from company computers quite frequently, often during hours when you were supposedly in meetings or handling urgent logistics issues." I felt the walls closing in around me. "You investigated me. You went to my workplace." "I protected myself," Marcus said quietly, "and our children. When someone starts rewriting history, when they start making you question your own memory and perception, you have to document the truth." What truth? That I was unhappy, that I felt neglected and unappreciated. The truth, Ms. Grant interjected, is that you committed adultery while lying to your husband about your whereabouts, used marital funds to finance the affair, and according to these records, falsified timesheets to cover your absences from work. The last part hit me like a sledgehammer. I never... You claimed overtime for hours you weren't in the building, Marcus said. The security logs don't lie, Lysandra. Neither do the parking garage cameras. I stared at the evidence spread across the desk, months of deception laid out in neat chronological order. It looked so much worse than it had felt in the moment. Each lie, each omission, each small betrayal had seemed justified when I was living it. Together, they painted a picture of someone I didn't recognize. "What do you want?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. The custody meeting felt more like an execution than a discussion. Ms. Grant read from her notes. Marcus wanted primary custody, supervised visits for me, and a clean division of assets adjusted for the money I'd spent on my affair. When she finished, I could barely breathe. "You want to take my children away?" I asked. Marcus didn't flinch. "I want to protect them. They're scared, Lysandra. They see what's happening." I begged him to try counseling, to start over, but his face stayed calm, resolute. "This isn't communication, it's character," he said quietly. Ms. Grant reminded me that Owen wasn't bound by any vows, that the betrayal was mine alone. The rest of the meeting blurred into paperwork and logistics, Marcus answering every question, like this was just another business deal. In the parking garage, I tried to apologize. He asked what for, the lies, the affair, the humiliation, or just getting caught. I didn't answer, because I didn't know. When he drove away, I sat in silence, realizing I'd lost more than my husband. I'd lost the version of myself who still deserved to be forgiven. The next few weeks blurred into paperwork and regret. My lawyer urged me to accept Marcus's terms. Fighting, he said, would only expose more damage. The kids were heartbroken. Evie cried, asking if it was her fault. Max just clung to Marcus. Watching him with them, patient, steady, hurt more than any verdict could. Owen vanished from my life as easily as he'd entered it, telling me we'd only ever been fun. My friends turned on me once the truth spread, and even my sister called to say Marcus deserved better. The custody hearing was brief. Marcus got primary custody. I got supervised visits. When the judge urged me to reflect on the kind of mother you want to be, I couldn't answer. Marcus's parting words still echo, "You forgot who you wanted to be." 6 months later, I know he was right. He's thriving, the kids are happy, and I'm alone, free, but hollow. The excitement I chased wasn't worth what I lost. Now I'm left with one question. Can I still become someone my children can be proud of? Maybe I can't fix what I broke, but maybe I can stop breaking what's left. Don't forget to hit like, subscribe, and turn on the bell so you don't miss the next story. Write in the comments from which city you are watching.